Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Morney, and joining me on the line, as always, the naming master of all time, Mr. Ethan Sachs. You've done it again. I didn't think it was possible with LCI, and this is brilliant. How does it come to you?
I mean, look, I stay up all night. Here's the thing, is that you provide all of the content for the episodes. I come in with, our housekeeping stuff, the ad breaks, the titles, the editing. We've really fully shifted our roles for the podcast here. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gifted. What can I say?
Yeah, I am excited to chat some one drops. I do think that's a great way to frame the format. I think it's a huge determining factor in what's going on.
It's wild to think that Phyrexia All Will Be One was perhaps one of the most aggressive sets we've seen. And I think this, maybe not by aggressive standards, outclasses it, but by one drop standards, certainly does. You have a point in the show notes later on that I think is great about, like, thinking back to the mulligan rules that we had for ourselves there of you just can't start the game on turn 3. And I was like, oh, duh, I need to be mulliganing way more than I am right now.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. You just can't start a game with a 3-drop. It's not acceptable.
So it's week 1, right? We finally got to get our hands on the cards with everybody else online, or get our digital hands on the cards, I should say. And I sort of said this to you a little bit beforehand, but I was like, I think we have a substantial number of takes from last week that we may need to walk back this week.
Yeah, I agree and disagree with that point. We'll get into it in the show. I do agree that there are some to walk back.
Yeah, I think, we have, I didn't feel like I had to completely, 180 on my thoughts on the format. And certainly some thoughts that we touched on last week, I felt like I even pushed harder in that direction about one drops, but some specific cards that I feel like I understand, some mechanics, I think we owe Descend an apology, but we'll get into all that a little bit later. So we're just going to do as much of an info dump as we can this week with all of our drafts under our belt, looking at the Lords of Limited Discord, seeing the discourse on Twitter, watching other people's streams, getting all that information synthesized and funneled into this episode. And I think framing it around one drops is really going to help. And I think help contextualize a lot of the other stuff. Like, once I started to think about the set in terms of what happens on turn 1, it helped illuminate some things that I couldn't quite put words to, about like why colors weren't performing well or whatever. So before we get into all that stuff, some housekeeping stuff. First things first is the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show. There's a lot of great perks over at the Patreon page. You know what we've got coming up this weekend? After Thanksgiving, after everyone's belly is full of turkey in the States, we've got an arena open coming up. So we've got a chance to play some sealed on Saturday, get your pools open. You know what a great place is to compare your pools, to get feedback on your builds? The Lords Limited Discord. And then you get to cheer people on day 2 for their drafts, get excited about people winning the $500 1K or the top prize of 2K on Sunday. I am jonesing to cash. I think the last 3 I've made the second draft and then fizzled out, which is just like it's fun. It's fun to play for high stakes, but I'd also like to receive some of those stakes this weekend,
I am just glad to have an excuse to play best of 3 for a week. Best of 1 has savaged my soul this past week in this format, and I was already thinking that I was going to switch to best of 3, and now I just have a reason to do it without feeling like I'm just slinking my tail between my legs over to best of 3 because I couldn't cut it in best of 1.
Oh my gosh, yeah, because best of 1 is the super duper ultra awesome sauce invite only queues. You don't want to play in the best of 3 queues. Anyway, so we've got a great community of folks to help you out with your sealed pool and all that good stuff in the Discord. Some great rewards as you move up the tiers on the Patreon. You get access to the show a day in advance, actually. Get it in your ears on Sunday. Get access to show notes if you want to see the show in written form, see our delirious thoughts and lists and bullets. And you can even get access to monthly coaching sessions with me or Ben. So if any or all of that sounds of interest to you, or you just want to show some love our way, head on over to the Patreon page.
Coaching sessions clearly paying off. I got a text message from my one coaching student last night that he crushed you on his win and in game for Mythic. So shout out to coaching.
Wow. Was this yesterday?
This was yesterday.
Unbelievable. So I'm all hopped up and sick on my COVID and flu boosters, and your student is just savaging me while I'm half awake playing on my phone.
That's what happened. Told him to get you, and he sent me the screenshot about 5 minutes later, the Mythic picture, and
wow.
and the victory button with little Lord Tupperware up in the up in the top left corner.
Wow. Could be you. Could be you, folks. And we want to shout out our new patrons the first week that they joined. So this week we are welcoming Evan, Jordan, Alex, Andrew, Frederick, Patrick, Blake, Dylan. My hands are blank. Nick, Peter, Alan, Jeff, and Raphael. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. Show is also brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., coolstuffinc.com, where they've got cool stuff in stock. And right now, that is Lost Caverns of Ixalan Draft Boosters, the last real draft format before Play Boosters take over. You got to get those booster boxes, store them in the closet. It's also coming up on the holiday season. So I imagine, like us, you are maybe someone who struggles with gift giving, or maybe you're on top of the gift giving and you want to get after it early, but CoolStuffInc.com has whatever you need for the holidays for those gaming people in your lives, whether it's board game, whether it's Magic, whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh! They've got it all over at CoolStuffInc.com. And please, for the holiday season, make sure you use them to support your loved ones with checkout code LOL, all caps, to get 5% off your order and to let them know that we sent you over there. We would really appreciate it, and they would too.
And then two reminders, I guess really one, because we already chatted about the Arena Open happening this week. We've got the Lords versus Resources Showdown number 16 coming up on Tuesday, the 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Be there, be square, watch us tie it up, or get crushed in resounding fashion. Either way, we'd love to see you.
It's not possible. I have too much good luck stored up. This is maybe the worst start to a format I've had all time. I didn't want to look, and I finally looked this morning before the podcast. I have a 50% win rate in this format right now, which is atrocious for me.
It's pretty bad. It's not great. But look, you got to get those reps in. Losing also comes with learning. So what have we learned this week? Where do you want to start in terms of like framing, walking back some of the stuff from last week, checking in on where we're at?
Let's start with some top commons, because I feel like we had a pretty solid handle on this, and I feel like I do have kind of a mental list for the top commons in each color. And I think you did this a couple episodes ago where we checked it versus the 17 lands data, which I think is good. Also, some shocking things to me when I opened 17 lands for the first time to look at these top commons after I put mine on paper.
You had to bite your tongue before the show because there's one you just like can't wait to talk about.
There is. I'm so excited to talk to you just about that, about the format. You're like a little tease before we started recording here. Just had your toast. I just wanted to talk Magic with you. Had to wait like 15 minutes.
Sorry, bud.
All right, so we're getting into white. Top commons. Number 1, Miner's Guidewing. Speaking of, let's chat 1-drops. 1 for the 1/1 Flying Vigilance. When it dies, a creature you control explores. I have in parentheses here, assuming you get multiples, because I do think it is not the best if you are not making it your plan A. Still playable and certainly good, but not like top common worthy. Do you know what I mean? So I think it might fall down as people start to get on this life a little bit more.
There's also a broader conversation here about assuming you get multiples with like framing the format as 1-drops matter and starting on turn 1, whatever, is that white has to be your base color for Miner's Guidewing to be the thing you're interested in getting in multiples. Then it's your top common, right? Because for your 1-drops to be effective, they have to be cards you can deploy on turn 1, which means you have to have that color of mana untapped in your hand on turn 1 as well, which means we're talking like at least 9, if not more, sources of that base color. So if you're something like a 10-7 split blue-white, Miner's Guidewing plummets, I think, a little bit in this list.
And I would also say what style of deck you're drafting,
sure,
and how the draft is going. I like once you get to 2 Miner's Guidewings, the third copy is like incredible. But otherwise, this next common might just be the best common in white, which is Oltec Cloud Guard. 3 and a white for the 3/2 flyer. ETBs make a 1/1. Like that is a more intrinsically powerful card than Miner's Guidewing, but Miner's Guidewing plays so well in the context of the format. So ceiling on Miner's Guidewing, I think, is higher than Oltec Cloud Guard, but the floor is also much lower than the floor on Oltec Cloud Guard. Oltec Cloud Guard does what it does every time you cast it, and it's just a rock solid Magic card.
Right. Yeah. Cloud Guard is pretty incredible. And then number 3 on this list, we have Tinker's Tote. And I think I co-signed this pretty hard. But what's incredible is that there are so many more commons in white that we could talk about. Like, white's really deep. I think it might be just the best color in the format. Where are you at on that?
That's where I'm at too. Right now in the updated color power rankings, I've got it equal to blue, that as is shifting up as a change, but I think it might be the best. It's so good and so versatile.
Yeah, good, versatile, and deep. Like it plays offense, plays defense, can be your base color, great support color, deep roster of commons. That's a lot.
Yeah,
So
it's a
so
lot.
Tinker's Tote we have at number 3. That's the 2 and a white. ETBs makes 2/1/1 artifact creature gnomes, and you can pay white to sacrifice it to gain 3 life.
But then also, just other things to think about with White's commons. Once you get a couple guide wings, or maybe some guide wings and the 1/1 flying lifelink bat that when you
Yeah.
descend, you scry, Ironpaw Aspirant just rockets up your white pick order. 1 and a white for a 1/2 ETB, put a +1/+1 counter on something.
Yeah, I had this insanely aggressive, busted Oops All One Drops deck that was like mostly mono white. I went into the lab, Ben, and I played 4 copies of Relic's Roar. That's the single blue instant target artifact or creature is base power 4/3 or base power toughness 4/3 until end of turn.
You really
Played
didn't want me to be right about that from our our crash course, huh?
well, so here's what happened. So I had a deck that was just like so many 1 drops. I think 5 Miners Guide Wings, 2 Ruin Lurker Bats, and only 1 Iron Paw Aspirant. But I realized that there's this holy trinity of Guide Wing on 1, Aspirant on 2, put the counter on Guide Wing, and then you get to play Glorifier of Suffering on 3. That's the 2 and a white 3/2. When it ETBs, you can sack something, and if you do, you put a counter on each of up to 2 creatures. So you sack the Aspirant with that, and now you have a 4/3 with the Glorifier, and you've got a 3/3 flying Vigilant attacking on turn 3, which is really powerful. And I think Glorifier is pretty low in White's pecking order at the moment. I think you can get them pretty late, but I have found that curve of 1, it doesn't even have to be Aspirant, but Aspirant just plays really well there, of 1, 2, 3 of Flyer, something, Glorifier to be really strong.
Yeah, for sure. So if we take a look at what 17 Land says to compare, it's very similar. It's got Oltec Cloud Guard 1, Miner's Guidewing 2, Petrify number 3. Let's chat Petrify. I've come up on it a bit. I think both in midweek were like, ugh, Petrify's terrible. I've come up on it, especially in aggressive white decks. Like if you're planning to get the game over with quicker,
Uh-huh.
Petrify, I think, does pretty good work as 2 mana shut down a creature. And even if your opponent gets some benefit, a turn or two down the road, not the end of the world, I think.
I think I agree. Where are you at in terms of number of copies? Like in those decks, how many Petrifies would you be willing to play? Or is there no ceiling?
I think 2 would be the max.
2 would be the max. Okay. I buy that. Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make in terms of what kind of deck you have, because if you're at all defensive, Cosmian Blast, the deal 4 to an attacking or blocking creature, and the Saw Blades, the uncommon artifact that deals 5 to a tapped creature, those are just much better removal spells, I think, for defensive decks or more late game decks. But I agree. I think Petrify, it's tough just because craft exists and then colors have so many things to different colors have so many things to do with the things like Fanatical Offering to sack or Acolyte of Affliction, whatever, bounce it, pick it up with the Malicious Pup or what a Mischievous Pup. But I think I agree. I think Petrify is better than Blech, as we perhaps thought earlier in the week.
Yeah, well, and I think in the context of aggressive decks, but also the other white removal spell, the 2 and a white exile a tapped thing. Well, it's 5 and a white exile something. Then if it's tapped, it
Yes,
costs
yes,
2 and a
yes,
white.
yes.
That one's also great in defensive decks. So white's got these 3 removal spells that aren't. I don't know that ranking them is necessarily helpful. It's just whichever one your style of deck wants
Mm-hmm.
to slot in as your interaction. And speaking of interaction, whew, so good.
We have got, I think, other than the format starts on turn 1, like if we were to do our episode of what are the 5 tweets or the how do you tweet about this format the most succinctly, I would say format starts on turn 1 and removal is so important. I drafted a deck that I think we'll talk about a little bit later when we chat about Descend, walking that take back, where I picked up 3 Join the Deads. If I had drafted that deck on Tuesday, I would have taken 0 Join the Deads, because every time I came across it, there was something else in the pack that I was like, ooh, I want that. But I just knew that I needed to interact. And one of the reasons, like, someone on Twitter replied to me like, oh, isn't Join the Dead like premium removal? It's fine, I think. Not, I wouldn't say premium. Like Deadweight and a Braid are in my mind premium because they interact cheaply. Because the format starts on turn one, it does feel awkward when you're like, do I have to join the dead this Miner's Guide Wing? And
But
you
you
are
do.
gonna have to do that. So like cannot be understated. And even in your aggressive decks, like a lot of the times there are some times where I think your deck can just be, I'm doing my thing. I don't need to interact. You need to interact with me. But even those decks, I think, need removal, which is not something I would always say. I would often be like, your aggressive decks, you want mostly threats, like maybe a couple pieces of removal, fine. I think you really need to be able to get stuff off the board in this format.
Well, it's how you catch up when you're on the back foot because blocking is so hard because so many of the good threats are evasive and there's so many
Mm-hmm.
good tricks. Like, so even if you've got the flyers to line up with your opponent's flyers, if they're the one attacking with the open mana and you're tapped out, it's just such a tough spot. So you need, but I would say removal is good, but like the good removal is good, right? Like Rumbling Rock Slides, 3 and a red is just horrible. Like it
Yes,
just irrelevant in the format. Join the Dead's
correct.
like about as high as you want to go on mana value. Like you don't want to be paying more than 3 mana for removal because you just start trading down on mana so much that it's not worth it.
Yeah, for sure. So while we're talking about each of these individual colors, I wanted to start chatting about the one drops and what these colors offer. And so white not only has all the things we listed before in terms of deep roster of commons, can play both offense and defense well, starts on turn one, but it also has some of the best one drops in the format, right? It's got the 2 evasive threats in Miner's Guidewing and Ruin Lurker Bat. It also gets a really good removal spell in Duskrose Reliquary at Uncommon, the single white additional cost to cast it, sack an artifact or a creature, but then it just exiles the thing until they deal with the Reliquary. It has Ward 2 also, but people just often can't really deal with it. Like I've been starting to think like, man, I think I need to start, do I need to start main decking non-creature removal as well in this format? Where are you at on that?
I have been. I've been main decking one copy of Artifact Enchantment Interaction. Yeah.
Yeah. When speaking of that, white also gets Deconstruction Hammer at common, which I do think, like back to our Crash Course argument, I do think it's a player in this format. And not because my argument of Short Sword is just good is probably a bad argument, but because of evasive flyers in white, like turn one Guidewing, turn two Hammer Equip is great. And then there are targets for it later in the game to blow something up that's relevant. You know, your opponent drops the whatever, the manufactory, the 3 white blue, make a 4/4. Like, what are you gonna do? You got to kill that, right?
Yeah. Gotta kill that. I agree. I love the hammer.
And then also I want to shout out Market Gnome, like its craft fodder, its defensive speed a little bit. That 3 toughness I think is important in terms of defensive speed. So just that's so many one drops: Guidewing, Bat, Reliquary, Market Gnome, Hammer. White just gets a lot of tools in that department.
Right. White is the best at one drop, which is part of the reason that white's making a very solid case for just being the best color. I updated the 17 lands tier rankings on our website also. So if that's something you're about, those will be up to date when you're listening to this episode. If you look at it, I mean, I've just got white's cards rated higher than blues too, I think now.
I think we just have to admit it. We just have to come clean. White's the best color. So what's going on with blue?
Blue, we've got one big change. So number 1 slot, Stillwater Wind Scout, 2 and a blue, 2/2 flyer, make a map token. That card's incredible. The number 2 slot, Oaken Siren, 1 and a blue for the 1/2 flying with Vigilance, taps to add a blue to cast your artifact spells. And then in number 3 slot, we've got Inverted Iceberg with the caveat that that's largely not a super aggressive card. So 1 and a blue, ETB, draw a card, mill a card, and then you can craft with 6 mana to make a 6/6 that taps or untaps something when it attacks. Iceberg
Yeah.
Titan, I believe.
Yes. I think that maybe you play like a copy as a cantripping artifact to trigger your stuff in some blue red aggro decks. But other than that, I think Iceberg is like it's premium in blue black descend control. It's really good in blue white control decks. But I agree with that. Let's chat about a card that is not on our list, but is performing quite well in 17 lands, and that's Cogwork Wrestler. Single blue, 1/2 flash. When it enters the battlefield, a creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn.
Speaking of those one drops, we're chatting one drops. It's the name of the episode.
That's the name of the episode. Well, so Cogwork Wrestler, I think also the next step here is this also brings to bear another conversation about the stats of the one drops. But I just want to get your sense of where you're at with Wrestler. Like, why isn't it on our list? Do you like the card? How highly do you pick it?
Yeah, the card's incredible. I'm happily playing 2 copies, I think. I could maybe see a deck where I would wanna play 3 if I had needed artifacts and wanted to shove my curve lower,
It's a
but
real sick blowout with the red one drop, the 1/2 that gets haste and +1/+0. If you have an artifact, you get to like attack in with that. They block, they think they're bouncing, and then you're like, oh no, 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 no. Here's an artifact at instant speed, and my thing is +1/+0 now.
but just sticking it successfully is such a huge swing in the game, and it's very difficult to play around.
Even if
Like,
you peg, if you're like,
you could reveal it to your opponent, like,
yes,
what are they gonna do? Because, like, the games are so shoved low right now in the top of the best of 1 queues. Because everybody, I think, for the most part, from my opponents, seem to know what's up in the format, and so you're playing against all these decks that have shoved their curves lower and lower and lower, so the decisions you make in the beginning of the game just keep getting crunched together, and there's so much that happens in the beginning of the game, and combat is happening. Like, there's just no way to avoid it from what cards are good in the format, and so Cogwork Wrestler as a result is quite good. I don't think it quite cracks ahead of it. Would be hard for me to take it ahead of Inverted Iceberg though early. Like, once I knew I were in a very aggressive deck, then I'd be willing to take it over Inverted Iceberg. But I think just blanket advice for taking cards in the format, I think Inverted Iceberg is a more powerful card than Cogwork Wrestler.
and so white we think plays well offense and defense. Do you think blue does the same? Is blue better suited for one or the other?
I think it just depends on what colors you're pairing it with. I don't think it itself wants to go one way or the other. I think if you're pairing it with white, it wants to be a lot more aggressive typically. If you're pairing it with black, wants to be defensive typically. Like, it's got cards that can support either way. I think it is slanted a little more aggressively than not. Like, the blue white decks that play Waterwind Scout and Oaken Siren, the blue white and blue red decks, those I think are the strongest blue decks.
Yeah.
And
Um,
Oaken Siren, we haven't, I don't think, given enough love to. It's a very unassuming card. Like, it just does so much. It wears all of the equipment very well. Like, then it's a 2/3 flying vigilance. It ramps you, it pecks in for damage. It just does everything you want in the format as far as being hyper efficient and getting you ahead on board while being an evasive threat.
Well, and I think perhaps the most important thing is that it blanks the bat, the Miner's Guidewing, and Spyglass Siren, which is one of Blue's one drops at uncommon. Like, that's one of its biggest boons. Like, yeah, it does all that other stuff, but the fact that you get to be like, I'm doing my thing, Miner's Guidewing on 1, and there's an Oaken Siren on 2. You're like, okay, now I need an aspirant, or I need a map token, and I need it to not hit a land, etc. Or my game plan is going to fall pretty flat.
Right. And then they put a Pirate's Hat on Oaken Siren, and it's a 2/3, and it still blanks your 2/2 Miner's Guidewing. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I think Siren is really well positioned in the format. And one of the things that I wanted to chat about with Wrestler sort of goes with what?
If anyone at home is playing a drinking game where you take a sip when we say chat, you're going to be pretty hammered by this point in the episode.
That's the title of the episode, baby. Well, and one of the things I wanted to talk about with well,
I
and
caught myself doing it too. That was not a dig at you.
well, and one of the things about Oaken Siren that also is brought to bear with Cogwork Wrestler is that they have 2 toughness. And so I think when we'll talk about this when we get to black in a second, but black has neither an evasive nor a 2 toughness 1 drop, which leaves it sorely out of sorts in this format currently, I think. So the fact that Siren has that 2 toughness to block the flyers, the fact that Wrestler has 2 toughness, even though it's on the ground, it does something a bit more. That's really important. And then the flip of that, I've noticed, like, I like the gnome, the colorless 2/1 that can find a land or a cave and put it on top of your library. But I have found 2 mana 2/1s in general to be awkward in this format. Like, they're just not super well positioned. And that's part of the sort of like 1/1 flyers are good, 1/2s are well positioned. And so then, and because those cost 1 mana, the 2/1s are not super well positioned. Like, Cogwork Wrestler can just eat a 2/1, no problem.
Yeah, that feels real bad.
It feels real bad. So I think being aware of that sort of like rock, paper, scissors, or whatever, however you want to think about it in terms of power and toughness, that trickle down effect from, well, because of this, then this, then this, of 1/1s to 1/2s to 2/1s is important to know. And the last thing I want to point out here, just talking about blues 1 drops that affect the board, it has no interaction, right? Its only 2 are Siren and Wrestler.
Well, but wrestler is interaction, right? I mean,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
would say
that's
I would
fair.
make the
That's fair.
case
That's
that it has
fair.
very good interaction with Cogwork Wrestler.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. What's going on with black?
Black, we've got similar rankings with one new player. Deadweight number one, that's the -2/-2 enchantment, and Join the Dead, one black black instant -5/-5 in the number two slot. And then new player, Deathcap Marionette, one on a black for a 1/1 death touch. When it ETBs, you may mill two cards. Where are you at on Deadweight versus Join the Dead? Do you like the first Deadweight more than the first Join the Dead?
I like multiple dead weights over the first Join the Dead. And so here's why I'm on that. So if we think about the format starts on turn one, black's one drops is three. Only three at common or uncommon. Deadweight, Greedy Freebooter, the 1/1 when it dies, you get a treasure and you scry one, and Bloodthorn Flail, that equipment that I think is currently unplayable, right? 3 mana to equip +2/+1, or you can discard a card to equip it. So that leaves you with Deadweight and Freebooter. Freebooter, I think, is another thing we kind of have to walk back from last week. Like, we were both like, this is good. I'm kind of like, I'll play it, but I'm kind of off of Freebooter because, so looking at what black has to do on turn one, it cannot be aggressive, right? It just has no ability to compete the way that certainly white, blue, will get to red. All of these colors can get on board on turn one in a really good way. Black can't do that. So black's way to combat that is with dead weights. And so I think if you are a black deck, you can't really be assertive, at least at common. Like, maybe you have some higher rarity stuff that you're messing around with, but even my base black decks, and I've had some success with black this week. We'll talk about Descend a little bit later, or maybe now, whenever, but I think black Descend decks are real. But deadweight's so important to not get run over early. I think Join the Dead's good, but I'm trying to think if I would take three. I'd definitely take the second deadweight over the first Join the Dead in
That's
black.
what my gut says is right. I've just had some awkward experiences with Deadweight where I wished it were Join the Dead,
I
but
mean, your
it's
opponent
good.
can slam like an aspirant on two, and then it's a 2/3, and you're like, what am I doing with this dead weight in my hand again?
Right, yeah. It's or if you don't draw the deadweight on time
Uh-huh.
and like the Oaken Siren is already a 2/3 because it's wearing equipment or it's got a +1/+1 counter from the aspirant on it, like what you're gonna like deadweight it and they still have a mana dork like after you deadweight it, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like
that's
I've
why
had a
I want to take multiple. That's why I'm almost like, do I want three? Because when I'm drafting black, I want dead weight in my opener every time. So that's why I'm almost like, maybe I want the third dead weight over the first Join the Dead, you know?
sure, that's what my gut says that deadweight's better, but I just have had some bad experiences, so I wanted to do a gut check there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I also want to talk Deathcap Marionette about why this is good because I feel very good about it being in the top black commons. I've had a bit of an epiphany about Descend. This is more of an in theory thing for me. I've only drafted one deck that I'm in the middle of right now, but I've played against some Descend decks too and just gotten absolutely slapped around by some really good Descend decks. I think for Descend 4, the key, and tell me if you think this is wrong because it sounds like you have more experience than I do. But I think the key is just you try to mill two twice, right? And then theoretically you're at Descend 4 or at Descend 4 with very little work because, like, presumably if one creature dies or something, you should have it online if you mill two twice. So I think those cards that mill two are kind of the thing that ties it together.
Yeah. I don't think so. Deathcap Marionette is an interesting card. I don't hate this as the number three common for us right now. But it's another thing that I think we want to zoom in on about how black plays in the early turns is that, like, it doesn't fix the problem of being able to deal with cheap threats on turn two either, right? Deathcap Marionette is a 2 mana 1/1 death touch. Like, ideally, you're trading that off with something larger later in the game, right? Skullcap Snail or whatever, the 1/1 that makes him discard, like, it's cute, but again, like, that's not doing anything for you in terms of combating the evasive threats or the two toughness cheap cards. Like, black has a tough time.
Right. Well, and I think that's why Skullcap Snail is out for me of the top commons because
Yes.
it's an appealing magic card. Like, I think appeals to our sensibilities as magic players, but it just doesn't do anything for you in the context of what you said, which is black can't be aggressive.
It
And so,
cannot.
like, your whole goal with black is to just please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. And then I'll be able to, like, do some stuff later in the game that is presumably better than my opponent's. And Skullcap Snail helps you with none of that. It's not aggressive and it doesn't help you not die. Like, choking your opponent's resources doesn't matter because the good decks can operate on very few resources. Like they don't need to hit their 6th land drop or whatever to, beat your face in. So Skullcap Snail just really is kind of homeless, I think, to me.
I think that's true. I mean, I think you can play it in these
Sure,
black
it's
decks,
just not
but
a premium card.
I agree. Well, and I think the thing that I want to shout out again about Deathcat Marionette is like, yeah, it's not ideal to trade it off with the 1-drop, but the fact that you can block their Tomb Raider with it on turn 2, right? When they're attacking you with their 2/2 and they're curving out aggressively, like it's nice that you have that option. So Marionette, I think I'm in for here at number 3. I also want to shout out a couple more cards, which is Tithing Blade being out, and it's a card that like I keep having a love-hate relationship with. Like there are times where I put it in my deck and draw it, and I'm like, this is the most abysmal card ever. And then there are times where I'm like, 2 mana, destroy your 7-drop dino, let's go. And like it's really hard for me to wrestle with those two ideas.
It's
And
not good, right?
it's again like similar to Snail. I think not good, but you will still play it. Like
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. And Visage of the Dread at uncommon as the 2 mana, like you get to snag an artifact or a creature out of their hand, and then you can craft it with 2 creatures, which is quite a cost. Crafting with 2 creatures for 6 mana to get a 5/4 menace when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can mill 2. It's awkward that doesn't affect the board. Like it feels good because you're like, oh, I can snag their 5-drop out of their hand or whatever, but it just
Their 1
doesn't.
and 2 drops are killing you while that's happening, though. Like, yeah, it
Exactly.
just doesn't solve Black's problem of I just need to stay alive.
You just need to stay alive. So that's why Deadweight is premium, Join the Dead is premium, Deathcat Marionette also premium. And just recognize that if you are black, if you are base black, you are not aggressive. It's just like it's not possible for black to play an aggressive game plan in this
Well, and I
format.
think you care about Descending, which is why
Yes.
Deathcat Marionette, I think, is in the top commons. And I do think
Mhm.
Descend is real. So going back to, we forgot to say 17 lands for blue. 17 lands blue is very similar to us. It's Waterwind Scout 1, Cogwork Wrestler 2, Oaken Siren 3, Inverted Iceberg 4. So almost
Pretty
identical there.
close.
And black, when I looked at 17 lands, was a bit all over the place, sorting by all users and top users. But the one common thread was that all of the black commons that were towards the top of black are just cheap. Like
Hmm.
all the 1 and 2 mana cards, like nothing expensive is anywhere near the top. So just
Yeah.
trying to keep your curve low, I think, with that sentiment of like just need to not die, and you got to keep pace with the blue, white, and red decks that are, getting on board on turn 1 with those 1-drops.
Yep.
All right, moving on to red. I feel the least confident here about our top common rankings, but number 1 slot, a Braid, 1 in red, instant, deal 3, or destroy an artifact. The card is incredible in the context of the format, just premium interaction. Number 2, Sunfire Torch. That's the equipment that gives +1/+0, and when your creature attacks, you can sacrifice it to deal 2 to any target. Huge player in red, white, and blue, red aggro.
Yeah.
And then the number 3 slot, Goblin Tomb Raider, the red 1/2 that when you have an artifact gets +1/+0 and has haste.
I want to shout out Torch. I mean, it's a similar reason why Deadweight is performing so well for me. But Torch, I think I sort of, at a certain point, I was like, you got Torch, you've got Idol of the Deep King, there's Deadweight. Like, how many ways do you want to deal with 2 toughness creatures? Turns out a lot, because not only do they deal with the cheap things, but the 2 best commons in Waterwind Scout and Old Tech Cloud Guard are 2 toughness flyers. And so it's great to be able to take those out as well.
Well, and it pumps things, right? So Sunfire Torch is the best of the ways to deal 2 because it
Correct.
pumps your threats until you need to use it. Late in the game, it can go face. Like
Yep.
basically, once you cast it, if you don't need to use it, says your opponent has -2 life. All of those things are very appealing in a red artifact deck.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get to 17 lands data, this was absolutely baffling to me. And I wanted to talk to you about this card so badly before we started recording. 17 lands says that Itali's Favor is the number 1 red common. If you sort by all users, if you sort by top users, I was flabbergasted. And this is no shtick about the data. This is like me being real. Like I bag on 17 lands a lot. I do not understand this, but I'm willing to believe that it's a good card. But
It's
this
hard to
was
argue with, right? Hard to argue with 62.9% win rate among top users. That's
but
high.
some of that could be inflation from blue red. I mean, I just don't. This is the first time in my life I have felt like a magic boomer a little bit because I just don't see it. Like, because I feel like you and I have had the experience of talking to older, more experienced Magic players about like some of the commons that we think are good that are just poo pooed, I think, by people who are on like still the
And
removal is premium
use
life.
some names. Let's light some people up here. Just
No,
kidding. Just kidding. Redacted.
and I'm worried that I'm gonna be that talking about Atali's favor. So to everyone that's listening to this right now, if this sounds crazy to you, I'm sorry, but I just want
On
to get my
YouTube, I'll gray your beard and your hair so that you look appropriately old and fuddy duddy. So here's my 2 cents about Atali's favor, and I have not stewed on this quite as long or as much as you. I don't think I've cast the card yet. But in terms of our rules of I've never seen it cast and been like, this seems good for me. Right? Every time it's cast against me, I'm like, that's a problem. Like, I think one of the problems I had with it in terms of evaluation was I sort of shortcutted. I just assumed that anything that has Discover on it is going to be less than its mana value. But Atali's favor is actually 3, right? It costs 3
three.
and
You
its
can, yes, you
Discover
can
is
chain them.
3. You can chain them, which I have seen, and that's really powerful. All the things we're talking about with +1/+1 counters from Aspirant, map tokens putting counters on stuff, like all of those little buffs, especially on evasive threats, if we're thinking about the format as Jeskai, dropping this on a Miner's Guidewing or a Waterwind Scout, whatever, like it's pretty real. Like I haven't played it myself, but I'm not shocked. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, this does make sense to me.
I can see all that stuff, but I am still shocked. Like if I had an open 17 lands,
We wouldn't be talking about
we
this
would
card.
not. It's just it's not even on my radar. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because I've played against it some, but not a lot. And I think I would have been playing against it a little more. But then, so I saw it in all users, and I was expecting when I sorted by top users for it to not be there, and then it was there too when I sorted
Yeah.
by top users. But so arguments against it, I think you have to have a creature. Now, you should if you're playing it in an aggressive deck, like by the
Mm.
time turn 3 rolls around, if you don't have a 1 or a 2 drop. But there's also some weird tension in that red really wants you to have artifacts, and this is not an artifact. Like, so blue red and red white ostensibly I think are very good homes for this, but then it's not something you can tap like
Right.
for those things that care about that. It doesn't trigger your artifact synergies. It's essentially like a worse version of Red Tooth Genealogist in my mind. And I did not love Red Tooth Genealogist. So the only thing I can think about is that the context of the format is so different from that.
It is.
But it's
It,
yeah,
it it really is. It's
yeah,
very different.
I guess so. But I don't know. It's so tough for me to imagine picking this highly. And I guess I need to start playing with it so that I have some experience with it on my side. And I am going to do that for the first time ever, 17 lands. So you're welcome, Data. You finally got me to try a card.
I cannot wait for what do we think, folks? Is it going to be by Wednesday? We're going to get the Atali's favor is illegal tweet.
No.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know. It's just hard for me. I can't wrap my head around. I just feel like a dinosaur. I can't wrap my head around where to pick it, when to include it in my deck. Like, it is a complete enigma to me. Like, it's the antithesis of every Magic card evaluation skill I have in my head is like telling me that it's not a good card. Like, I had it in the F in our tier list. Like, I thought I was never going to play it all format. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to imagine taking it over a Braid. I don't think I can do that just physically, but I think the rest like makes sense. And certainly once you've got the cheap stuff, right? Once you've got the Tomb Raiders, and I think also if you're like, what's great about this is that it's not a cheap play, and not a cheap play. It costs 3, but in the context of the format, it's not a cheap play, and so you can still be like base white with like 4 Miner's Guidewings, be a 10-7, 11-6 split with your mana, and then you have these favors as well, and they play pretty well. I could see it.
I mean, I can see it. I can see both sides of it. Like, I can see my reasons for not liking it. I can see the reasons to like it. It's so hard for me to like think I'm going to pick it, and I guess I just need to start picking it and playing it. The place I actually am kind of the most excited to try it out is Red Green Dinos. I think that might be a better home than Blue Red or Red White. I don't know.
Because then you're slapping that on your whatever 3 mana 3/3, and now you have a 4/4 trampler plus discover 3.
Right, like, if we skip ahead to green, like, if we bounce around here a little bit, green's
Yeah.
top common by 17 lands is Armored Kincaller, which is 2 and a green for 3/3. If you have a dino, you gain 3 life. That was also not on my radar as a high-performing green one, but when I looked at that on 17 lands, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that checks out. It's gonna help you not die to the flyers so much." And Atali's Favor, like, finding your Armored Kincallers, then it's awesome if you hit that, or vice versa. Suiting up an Armored Kincaller with an Atali's Favor to turn it into a 4/4 trample
Mhm.
is a real threat. So I kind of want to experiment in that life.
Yeah, I buy that. I have not. I've seen the power of red green dinos on the other side. I haven't drafted it myself. I have only drafted one base green deck. Still sticking with our take from last week about green perhaps not being the best. Like I don't think maybe 5 greater than signs was fair, but I've found it tough to get into green at least at common.
Yeah. So the rest of the red, 17 lands. So Atali's Favor 1, Goblin Tomb Raider 2, that's the 1-drop. Sunshot Militia 3, that's the thing where you can tap 2 untapped artifact creatures to deal a damage at sorcery speed. Card's
Militia's
excellent.
so good, yeah.
Really strong, yeah. And a Braid in 4th place, which is shocking to me. I think very hard for me to imagine picking those other cards over a Braid.
And just to, double down on red being great, it also performs well in the 1-drop department. It gets the Goblin Tomb Raider as a really strong threat. It gets Diamond Pickaxe at uncommon and Sunfire Torch at common as great equipment, and Triumphant Chomp as cheap interaction at uncommon. So really doing a ton in the 1-drop spot there.
Diamond Pickaxe plus Zoetic Glyph, just completely illegal. Have you been beaten down by that?
No, I've just been beaten. Like a Diamond Pickaxe doesn't need anything else. It's just great.
Oh, you mean Zoetic Glyph doesn't need anything else?
Sure, but both of those. Yeah, you're like two great tastes that taste great together. Yes, I agree.
All right, moving on to green. I also don't feel super confident about our common rankings here, but I also don't think they're particularly important, except
Yeah.
if Armored Kincaller is actually that clutch. And I am certainly willing to buy Armored Kincaller from 17 lands.
It's high, right? It's in terms of the gap between Kincaller, looking at top users right now, Kincaller at 1 and Poison Dart Frog at 2, there's a 1.5% gap between those two.
That means nothing to me.
It's big.
I
Anything over a percent is big.
Okay. So our top commons, my top commons, with the person that has a 50% win rate. So
Stop
take this for what
it.
you will.
Stop it.
Number 1, Poison Dart Frog. Number 2, River Herald Guide, the thing that explores. And Pathfinding Axe Draw, the 4/3
That
dino
has
explores.
overperformed. It's big.
Pathfinding Axe, it's a problem.
It's
like
huge.
every time my opponents cast it, I'm like, it's kind of.
Well, 3 toughness is kind of a magic number because all of your cheap stuff, like your Deadweights and your Idol of the Deep King and your Triumphant Chomp, like all of this stuff that deals with 2 toughness, you're like, wait a minute, I have to deal with 3 toughness or 4 maybe?
Right, or 4, and then that's another one where that has been impressive in Red Green Dinos, Pathfinding Axe Draw. And then if you get Atali's Favor in there as well, then all of a sudden that's potentially a 6/5 trample,
Yeah.
and you put another thing on the board. So I don't know. I'm going to try some Atali's Favors out, and we'll report back next week.
Poison Dart Frog number 1, huh?
When my opponents go Dart Frog into Axe Draw, I'm kind of like, oh, crap.
I guess
and then they followed up with a 5-drop Dino.
Well, and going back to the feeling about Black's the Marionette, the 2-mana 1/1 Death Touch, like Dart Frog in a pinch can just trade with Guidewing. It can just trade with Bat. Like that's pretty important.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm in for Dart Frog here.
And I don't feel strongly about it. Like I'm not the champion of Dart Frog, but it's been annoying on the other side of the battlefield.
You are the champion of Dart Frog. That's you.
Yes.
Green doesn't have a ton of 1-drops. It has 6 1-mana plays, but I would say Cenote Scout is the only good one of the bunch, right? That's the 1-mana 1/1 Explore at uncommon. It's also got Seeker of Sunlight at common. That's the 1-drop that you can pay 2 and a green to have it explore at sorcery speed. It's got similar issues to Freebooter, right? That it's a 1-mana 1/1 on the ground. And so what does it do? It's not doing anything for you. It can't be aggressive and it can't block the 1/2s or the 1/1 flyers.
Yeah. Cenote Scout premium though.
Premium, I agree, but it's just hard to get. I have whatever. It's early. I've been more exploring what Black has to offer. Like that's been my sort of going into the lab this past week, trying to figure out that because I feel like I get the Jeskai 1-drop thing, Black, I feel like there's something there. Green, I don't know what's there. I'll leave that to smarter people than me.
All right, we're back with our updated power rankings for the archetypes. S tier, we've got another deck joining blue white. Blue white and blue red, just absolutely incredible. But I think one of the cool things about this format that I'm excited to explore is it already feels like people are pretty on that life, at least in the drafts that I've done. Like, it has been tough to draft those decks at times
Mm-hmm.
already in certain pods, and I've been facing those decks a lot in the mythic ranks. I guess that means they're more open at other tables if I'm facing them a lot. But I think as people start to contest those decks, because they all rely on the curve being so low, the more people that try to draft those decks, they are going to get cannibalized a little bit. And I think that's going to maybe hopefully open up some breathing room for some of the things like Dinos or Blue Black Descend or other things like that to really get a chance to, breathe a little bit, as
Makes
it
me
were.
nervous about the arena open drafts. Like, I just feel like you're gonna face some nutty aggro decks, some nutty blue white, blue red decks on day two.
Maybe, but not if people know what's up, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it would be tough. I don't know. I'm going to, I think, exclusively play best of three this week just to see what the format is like in that context, because I do think it is going to be different, like high stakes. I can't imagine somebody just letting all, like in the arena open, all of the Miners Guide Wings and all of the Ruin Lurker bats just fly around the table like they do in the best of one queue sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, possibly.
Right, in tier one, we've got red white, red green, green white, and blue black, and then the rest, like, I don't feel super strongly about. But these are certainly the decks that have impressed.
Hmm.
Those six.
And our updated color rankings here are, I think we're just going to do it. White's in first, blue in second, red in third, green fourth, black fifth, green and black tied for fourth. But I think clearly Jeskai, then black and green.
Yeah, and I would almost say maybe red equal to blue in second. I've been
Yeah,
very
yeah.
impressed with it.
Red's great. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it could be white one, blue and red tied for second. What are some broader format thoughts that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, we've been just talking about one drops nonstop this episode, but I do think that is the defining feature of this format for me. That it really does start on turn one with great cards, and as a result, you're heavily incentivized, I think, to try to be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've run into in the drafts I've done, which is part of the reason my win rate is so abysmal, like the decks I've gotten, the good decks, I've run poorly, and my opponents have had some great rares. Some of the ones that snowball turn two, turn three, turn four. And then I've also had some really tough drafts where I've been trying to get into the Just Guy life, and I've been cut out of it, and I haven't really known what to do when that happens. And I think I've got a clearer idea about that now because I've been doing some thinking about it. But then not every draft is going to let you be proactive. Like some drafts, you are going to have to draft Descend, or you're going to have to draft Green Black Descend, or Blue Black Descend, or whatever. Just knowing what to do when white, red, blue isn't open for you in your draft, I think is going to be an interesting piece of the format going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think similar to in Phyrexia All Will Be One being such an aggressive format, if you can't be proactive, and that might even just come down to losing the die roll, you need to make sure your plays are also good when you're on the defensive end of things, right? Like, you shouldn't be certainly don't be afraid to trade off your Miners Guide Wings or whatever if you're on the draw, but also just like making sure that your defensive plays are also cheap, your Cosmium Blasts, whatever, if you're in a defensive flavor of white. Like, that's been my issue as well.
Right. And just the curves being shoved lower. I mean, if you look at deck pictures of trophy decks in the Lords of Limited Discord, like the curves look like cube decks. They look like mono red cube decks. It's like 8 1 drops, 9 2 drops, and some 3 drops and some 4 drops. It's wild, the pictures of the premium decks.
It's not a curve, it's a cliff. That's what someone in our Discord said, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. It's just like 1 and 2 and then a ledge that drops off to the rest.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think we've talked about this a little bit also, but being able to interact for cheap, very crucial in proactive decks and reactive decks. But I almost think like setting out to draft a reactive deck is so tough. But
You need a reason. It should not be your game one. Like, your game one plan should be, I want to draft one of the Jeskai colors one of the Jeskai color pairs, and I want to be assertive. And then if that doesn't pan out, then I think you backdoor into something else. But I agree. I don't think you want to start off being a reactive deck.
But to me, that's one of the cool things about the format is that like there's not a clear off ramp for how to pivot from like if you start going after that and you've got like a guide wing and you've got a water wind scout and then blue and white start to dry up, like there's no clear way to pivot into black descend from that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So a bit of risk reward there, and I think figuring out how to safely bridge that gap when the Jeskai stuff isn't open to a deck that is still good and can still compete against those Jeskai decks that other people get in the best of one queues is going to be an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier, but mulliganing, I think just being aware that you have to be critical of your opening hands because if you're looking at your opening hand and your reaction to your opponent playing turn one Miner's Guidewing is, well, crap, I'm in trouble. Like you can't keep that hand because your opponents are going to have turn one Miner's Guidewing or turn one Runelurker Bat or turn one whatever so much of the time in the format.
I've definitely kept hands where my first play was Waterwind Scout. And I'm like, this is a great hand. I've got one of the best commons in my opener. And then I'm like, no, stop playing stuff, please. Just wait. No rush.
A little no rush magic from
Doesn't work.
StarCraft 2. One of the other things that I want to talk to you about is Grasping Shadows. I was just going through and grading our tier list, and I got to Grasping Shadows, and I was like, man, this card could be so good, and it's so bad. Like, I just think how terrible Grasping Shadows is tells you so much about the context of the format. Like, I had it as a B in the tier list, hadn't updated this since like a week ago, and moved it down to like a D.
So this is a 3 and a black enchantment. It's an uncommon. If you attack alone with a creature, it gets lifelink and death touch until end of turn. And then Grasping Shadows gets a counter on it. Once it has 3 counters, it flips into a cave, taps for black. You can pay black, tap, remove a counter from it, lose a life, and draw a card. And we were really high on this. We thought this might be the best black uncommon in the set. It's not. It's not even close.
Close.
I do think this card can do work, but it's really narrow. So I think a D is probably right for this.
Yeah, it's hard for me to even imagine the homes because you're taking turn 4 off the turn that you play it, which is not great to not affect the board because you're so likely to be under assault as the black deck from Jeskai decks. And then you also have to then tap a creature to get the life gain, which is not ideal because you're likely to be under assault again from the Jeskai decks. And then assuming you manage to stay alive and flip it, like it's just so derpy and so dirtily. Like that the amount when it's almost like if it works, you've probably already won the game. Like you don't need this to help you. Like it doesn't help you turn the corner at all against the kinds of decks that are going to be pressuring you.
I agree.
Cards like
probably better to just say this card is bad than to like defend it and be like, but in this really narrow scenario, like it's probably just bad.
But if you put this in, but I think if you put this in a different format, could be the B that we thought it was. And even just an average format that, you start on turn 2 instead of starting on turn 1, or that black has better tools to combat what those decks are doing. It's just a bummer that this fell flat because I was excited to play it, but that also just crystallized a lot of things for me. When I moved Grasping Shadows down, that was also when we talked about that black uncommon that pulls something out of their head, Dreadful Visage or whatever.
Of the Dread, yeah, or Visage of Dread.
That also just suffers from you're just not on board. Like you gotta get on board.
Yeah, and it's awkward because you're like, well, but this will do something later. I mean, it's sort of why we were taught like we're high on the iceberg in blue, but like it's a 2-mana play that doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect the board on turn 2. It's really dangerous to be in that spot.
Yes. And I think so similar to all the stuff we've been talking about, being under assault, whatever, if both players buy into format starts on turn 1, you're both, playing Jeskai, you've got your things, first of all, the games are kind of exhausting. Like there's so many, I'm serious. There's so many decisions in like turns 1 through 5. If you're playing Jeskai deck versus Jeskai deck.
It's horrible to play on mobile too. Not like because of the client, but just like you can never pass priority because you've always got some trinkety thing that can activate. And you've got so many, like I was playing a red-white deck with the 1/3 that you can tap 2 things to like ping them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my god, just like I click on my creature and then but I gotta click on the equipment behind the creature and just horrible. Just terrible.
Just terrible, huh? But I do think that also bums me out that I've not done so, because I do think I've played pretty well, and there's just a lot going on in the games in turns 1 through 5 in those Jeskai mirror matches. I do think, in a couple week or two, like, that's gonna get a little old maybe, because it's going to be offer the same types of complex decisions in turns 1 through 5. Like, there's not gonna be a ton of variety there. But for right now, really enjoyed the gameplay in those mirror matches.
Yeah, I'm less jazzed about it. Like it does feel kind of similar to OG Ixalan, where I'm like, I can already tell, like, I know what the best thing to do is, and it doesn't interest me at all. So I'm gonna be like, just trying to do whatever other nonsense I can. But the idea of like, if both players are adhering to the rules of engagement of the format starts on turn one, the games do go pretty long. You do have to kind of have stuff like the hidden lands are a bit more relevant than I thought. Like there's a lot of like, okay, the dust settles and now we're in top deck mode, and oh man, you get a free spell from your land. Okay, that's something.
Yeah, that has mattered. Late game craft has mattered. Some of the mana sinks. Just having things around that do stuff after you've traded, and you're in top deck mode, which is where it gets to sometimes.
Mhm.
I do think you have to be careful about the hidden lands, though, too, especially if you're on the Guide Wing life. Those
Oh
ETB
yeah,
tap lands are a cost for sure as well. Like maybe 1 to 2 hidden lands.
yeah. Well, should we? What do you? Is caves? Where are you at on caves these days? It's bad,
Down.
right?
It's not good.
You
I
saw
have
you trophied with a bat cave deck though, right?
I did, but that was largely just red-white card quality that happened to have a cave sub-theme. It was not a caves deck, and I have tried several times in some of these drafts that have been tough for me to pivot into caves. There's just so much that has to go right. Like, you have to have people not poach the lands from you. You have to have people not poach the payoffs from you. You have to have the payoffs opened. Like, there's just so
That's
many
too
balls to
much.
juggle in the air to try to get it to come together.
Yeah, yeah. That's too
Um,
much.
but yeah, speaking of, other things going on in the format other than Jeskai, Red Green Dino's been very impressive. We've talked about Descend, like Blue Black Descend control has been crazy impressive to me. And even Green Black, like I've got a Green Black Descend deck right now that I think is gonna do some work. Once I put together that it was Mill 2 twice to get to Descend 4, I was coming around on it a lot more. Especially because you just can't always get the Jeskai decks. And then knowing how to make the Descend decks tick and have good defense against the Jeskai decks is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, we got an email from one of our listeners who was saying like, "Hey, I don't think Descend is that terrible. Like, here's a deck that I 7-0'd with in Diamond. That's like Black Descend. Here are some key pieces." And then one of my next drafts that day, I opened Souls of the Lost, which is a rare. It's 1 and a black. It's like Tarmogoyf basically. As an additional cost to cast it, you discard a card or sack a permanent, and then it has Fathomless Descent. Its power and toughness are equal to that, and then toughness 1 plus your Descend. And I was like, all right, let's give it a shot. And like ended up with 2 copies of it and just a really good blue black Descend deck playing 2 copies of Waterlogged Hulk. I've been running, I will say, I think if you're doing the Descend thing, if you're doing like Oops All Mill, which I do think you should be doing, like this deck has double Hulk, double Deathcap Marionette, double Another Chance. That's the 3 mana you can mill 2, and then you can return 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Like, I think you want to run more than 40 cards. That has been relevant for, and I am usually like, no, that's stupid. I have done it now. I think playing my third 45 card deck of the format. I think it's really necessary, and it's not been like superfluous. I had one game with this deck where I needed even one more turn. I was like, I could win if I had one more card in my library, but I don't have it, so I decked. But I think it's real. I think the Descend decks are real. But again, your curves can't be clunky. Like this is just all 1s, 2s, and Join the Deads in my deck.
Yeah, here's what I think. I think you're jealous that I took over the title of the main brewer, the main experimenter in the podcast the last couple formats, and I think you're going after the title. I think you're coming for the throne.
Sir, if you think that title ever left me, I think you're sorely mistaken. So if the format starts on turn one, I just wanted to look at like tools to combat aggro because I do think that's where I'm looking. Like it feels like everybody's on this. The format starts on turn one. I'm being aggressive. I'm playing my cheap stuff. Like there are tools in the format to combat it. So we've talked about dead weight. Wanted to check the pulse on the two like mini sweepers. So tectonic hazard is the single red, one to all of your opponent's creatures, and malicious eclipse is the one black black -2/-2 to everything. Are we
No
in a
to
world where we might want to main deck these if you're a defensive deck?
hard no on both of those from me. I've been there. I like because I've gotten pushed out of Jeskai a couple times,
Uh
and
huh.
the issue tectonic hazard is just a no, I think, and then
Okay.
malicious eclipse is kind of appealing. But you also just have to have your own curve shoved so low. Like, there's never a world where you can build your deck where, like, your stuff survives Malicious Eclipse and your opponent's stuff doesn't. And then if you're trying to play the game where, like, you have your Malicious Eclipse in your opener and you're like, oh, great, I just am not going to play anything and I'll Malicious Eclipse on turn 3. Like, sometimes your opponent goes Oaken Siren suited up with a thing and then it's a 2/3 and then you're
Yeah.
still dying and you have this Malicious Eclipse rotting in your hand. I've been there. I've tried that life. No go for me.
Okay. I feel like I still might try and live that life, but everything you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. We talked about a braid. We talked about Cosmium Blast, spring loaded saw blades. We haven't chatted about, but there are some really good high toughness two drops in the format that let you play defensively. Hermetic Nautilus in blue, the 1/4 Vigi, and Dauntless Dismantler in white. That's the 1/4 that has your opponent's artifacts enter the battlefield tapped, and then you can like sack it to blow up artifacts of a certain mana value. Even Sunshot Militia, but I will say I think that 4 toughness is kind of the key to get out of range of like whatever. They have a 2 power thing, plus they put an equipment on it, or they put a +1/+1 counter from a map token on it. I think those are good plays to be aware of. And then blue has some good stuff with like Shipwreck Sentry, the 2 mana 3/3, River Herald Scout out of our top blue commons, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't get there. I mean, it's a great Magic card that just, again, is kind of homeless in the format, similar to the rat that makes them exile. Your blue decks just want artifacts so badly. Like, Oaken Siren is just in the same mana value slot and so much better for what the blue decks are asking of you than River Herald Scout.
Yeah, I think I
And
buy it.
it's wild that 2-drop Explore is not quite efficient enough to make the cut, but I think that's where we're at in the format.
Yeah,
Not that you're never playing River Herald Scout. It's just not an important piece to the blue decks.
it's not premium. Yeah. Yeah, I buy that. So I
Could be in the control decks. Like, I would buy that it has a better home in blue black control for sure. The blue black descend stuff, but blue red and blue white is not excited about River Herald Scout, and that's a tough place to be as a blue card that doesn't really want to go in blue white or red white or red blue. I mean,
and so I'm not sold on all of this, but like, blue gets some blockers here, black has dead weight, red has a braid, white has its removal spells. Green doesn't have anything in this department. Like it doesn't interact, and its cheap creatures aren't great. And I have seen the red green dinos thing, and I've played, Sultai decks or whatever. But I just think like you really have to be, I think, pretty focused, streamlined for green to work. And I don't think it can play defensively.
well, it does get Armored Kincaller though, right? That's not nothing to
Right.
maybe buy
Three
you
three
another
gain
turn or
3.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then I think if you're curving out, you gain some life. Then the idea is that you're not playing defense; that you're trying to turn the corner to large trampling offense, maybe quicker than you can die with flyers. And that's all theory crafting for me for the most part. But it did when I saw the Armored Kincaller #1 on 17 lands prior to recording. I was like, oh yeah, that checks out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious to experiment with that.
Yeah. Okay. I buy it.
I do want to circle back before we take a look at a log here, real quick, to Descend, just to ask you, because it
Yeah.
sounds like you have more experience actually drafting them than me. Have you pivoted off of starting into Jeskai to a Descend deck? Because that's more the thing I'm curious about right now, how to do that. Because it's hard for me to conceptualize how do I get started drafting a Descend deck if every time I'm given a decision, I'm going to bias towards low curve Jeskai decks, you know? Like, what incentivizes you? When do you know to abandon ship on the Jeskai stuff? Or what's the good enough to send payoff that you're just willing to start down the descent line? For example, if that blue-black mythic, the 8/8 is ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
I would just start drafting a descend deck for that if I opened it as my pack one, pick one rare, you know?
Uh-huh.
But how do you, because it sounds like sometimes you've just decided, I'll draft descend, and it's worked out well for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we were all working with very small sample sizes. So I had that blue black deck where I just sort of decided to try Souls of the Lost. Another deck where Souls of the Lost played a part was one where I started with Inti, the red 2/2 that's like a busted rare
Yeah,
whenever
that
you
card's great.
attack. So I started with that, a couple copies of Belligerent Yearling, the 2-mana 3/2 trampler, trying to figure out, maybe I had a Colossal Dactyl, thinking about maybe I'm going to be red-green dinos. And then pick 6, Souls of the Lost was in the pack, plus 3 other black cards. And so I just decided to take a flyer on that rather than take whatever, a River Herald guide to get me deeper into red green. And then ended up getting into a base black self mill deck with that life, just sort of pivoting that way. But other than that, I haven't, like, I don't know what I would get into it at lower rarity for, like dead weights, maybe like late
Yeah,
dead
that's my
weights.
in theory in my head is that you just realize black is super open, and then
Yeah,
you move into black, and then draft a black
I
descend deck
think
as a
that's it. I
result.
think I think you get you.
So
Yeah, I
maybe you
think
start Jeskai and you just do a hard pivot for like black being
yeah,
open
I think
potentially.
it's not a light pivot. And I think it's something like this where you're like, "Oh, I think I'm at a table of people who hate black." And I think that's going to happen, at
A
least in
fair
these
amount,
early weeks, a
sure.
fair amount.
Yeah. All right, let's check out a draft log before we go here. So, pack one, pick one. See the following cards as options. In the commons, there's a River Herald Guide, 2 and a green for the 3/1 Bigi. When it ETBs, it explores. There's Compass Gnome, 2 mana for the 2/1 ETBs. Search your library for a land or a cave, put it on top. There's Adaptive Gem Guard, 3 and a white for a 3/3. Tap 2 untapped artifacts or creatures you control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. Moving on to the uncommons, we've got some medium ones here. There's a Visage of Dread, 1 and a black for the artifact. ETBs, you choose an artifact or a creature. That player discards that card. And then you can craft with 2 creatures into a 5/4 menace that when it ETBs or attacks, you can mill 2 cards. We've also got Kutzil Malamet Exemplar. That's 1 green-white for a 3/3. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Love that line of text. Just feels very safe. And whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's, if you can solve that sentence, you're going to do very well on the SATs. And then we've also got Dauntless Dismantler, the 1/4. Artifacts your opponents control, ETB tapped, and you pay white XX to sacrifice to destroy each artifact with mana value X.
I had to twist your arm to draft this the other day. Are you a believer of this card yet?
I'm not really a believer, but I was shouting it out because I trust you as a valued friend and podcast co-host.
That's 50% of this podcast. Okay, great.
So I my internal card evaluator told me to skip it, but I read it for you.
I really appreciate that.
We've also got Quadi Scavenger, 2 and a green for the 3/2 Descend 4. ETBs, if there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. And your rare, Tishana's Tidebinder, 2 and a blue for a 3/2 Flash. When ETBs, counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. If it's an ability of an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, that permanent loses all abilities for as long as Tidebinder remains on the battlefield.
It's a pretty stinky pack, if we're being
Pretty
honest,
stinky
right?
pack. I've had a lot of pretty stinky packs.
Yeah, this isn't great. Like Tidebinder, you would play if you're already in blue, but I don't think it's a pull into blue. Visage of Dread, I like in theory, but the more I'm looking at it and just thinking about it, like, I don't know if I want to get into black for this. I think the main takeaway here is like, this pick isn't gonna like send you down any path. You're not gonna fight over anything for this. So I'm not sure this pick matters a ton. I think it's between those 3 uncommons for me: Visage, Kutzil, and Dauntless Dismantler. And maybe just to be a contrarian, I would take the Dismantler here, but I don't know.
Well, I wonder if that's the case, because that was the feeling I had looking with this pack as well. I was almost toying with Compass Gnome just as like a card I'm likely to play, but wouldn't
Yeah.
push me in any direction. I wonder also if you're just supposed to take Kutzil as the best card then, right? Like
Yeah.
if you end up in green white will be excellent for you, and you're also just completely willing to not put any weight on it pending what other cards you see.
Yeah, I buy that. I buy that.
I did land on the Visage of Dread, but this was a day ago, and I already was lower on Visage of Dread, and I'm even lower, I think, on it now than I was a day ago. So I think I would pick something other than that in hindsight, but I don't think it matters too much.
I think I like Visage of Dread if I know I have a deck where I'm not dying already. Like if I've got 2 or 3 dead weights, then I feel better about including Visage. But in terms of taking it early like this, it's already like narrowing the path of your draft a little bit.
For sure. Moving on to pack 1, pick 2. The awkward packs continue.
Wow.
We've got Promising Vein, Colorless Cave, and you can pay 1 tap, sacrifice it, search your library for basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. That card is clunky. Holy cow.
Yep. Yeah, nothing feels better than just like, okay, just wait. You do nothing. I'll do nothing. Then you keep doing nothing. Then I'll go fetch a land. Like no one has time for this.
Nobody's got time for that. There's also a Poison Dart Frog, 1 and a green for the 1/1 reach. Taps to add a mana of any color, and you can pay 2 to give it Death Touch until end of turn. Echo of Dusk. Where are you at on this? 1 and a black for a 2/2 Descend 4. If there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, it gets +1/+1 and lifelink. Are you a believer in Descend decks?
I think it's still pretty much filled, like maybe C- in Descend decks. Like, I'm not looking to pick this up, and I don't think I would ever at the end of a draft be like, wish I had Echo of Dusk. Like, I might say, wish I had 2 drops where
Right.
this slots in, but no, I don't think so.
Okay, there's a Dinotomaton, 3 and a red for the 4/3 menace. ETBs, target creature you control gains menace until end of turn. There's another Visage of Dread. There's Soul Coil Viper, 2 and a black for the 2/3, black tap, sack it, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it at sorcery speed, and another Dauntless Dismantler. Shouting it out just for you.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Wow, I could have 2 Dauntless Dismantlers. Love to see it. With your path, having the black card, I think I like taking Soul Coil Viper. There's a Rampaging Spiketail in the pack. That's the black mana cycler, and that could wheel. And so if we're going down this black path, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings. I think I would take Soul Coil Viper regardless of what I took. Pack 1, pick 1. Maybe if you take Cootseal, you take an Attentive Sunscribe or a Dauntless Dismantler, but none of those go well with Cootseal either.
No.
All right, moving on to pack 1, pick 3.
Ooh.
See the following cards as options. There's a Volatile Wanderglyph, 1 and red for the 2/2. When it becomes tapped, you can discard a card if you do draw a card. There's Sunfire Torch, the red equipment that gives +1/+0 and equips for 1. And then when you attack, you can sack it to deal 2 to a target. There's Another Chance, 2 and a black for the instant, mill 2 cards and return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. And then uncommon-wise, there's Grasping Shadows, which we're a way down on from what we talked about in the episode. There's a Gold Fury Strider, 4 and a red, 3/5 trample. You can tap 2 untapped artifacts or creatures to give something +2/+0, but like another stinker of a pack here.
You have not read the card that I want to take.
Which is Brackish Blunder?
Which is Confounding Riddle.
Really?
2 and a blue for an instant. Choose 1. Look at the top 4 cards. Pick 1 and then put the rest in your graveyard or counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. This is primo in Descend decks.
Primo.
Primo.
For the impulse effect?
Yeah, for the impulse effect. It's not like being able to counter something is great. Like I'd say it's probably, I don't know, 80-20, 75-25 in terms of how often you're using each mode. But the fact that you get like 3 permanents in your bin with this card is huge.
So are you also, that is shocking to me. The first, I have so many questions.
The content is a-flowing.
The first question is, how do you not die while you're casting Confounding Riddle to impulse for 3 mana?
Because you've deadweight, you've done stuff on 1 and 2, you've put in the work.
You put in the work. Okay, so are you by extension then, as a follow-up question, excited about the 2 and a green that lets you get a creature and a land and dumps the other 2 in your graveyard?
I am not, but I could be. One of the reasons I'm not is just because I'm not excited about playing green.
Okay, that's fair. All right, interesting. Confounding Riddle.
So I see what you've selected, which is Volatile Wanderglyph, which is a good card. I wonder even if, now that it's today, I mean, Sunfire Torch is in our top 3. Glyph is not. Like, should you just take Torch?
Well, what I was thinking here with the Wanderglyph pick is I have no direction, right? So this potentially lets me pivot off black into white-red or red-blue, which are good decks, if that happens to be open. Because the packs I've seen have just been garbage. I have no information about what's open so far, like 0.
Sure.
And if Jeskai is not open, potentially like a spicy red-black Reanimator deck with the Wanderglyph discarding for the Soul Coil Viper. Like, I thought it complemented the cards I had well and potentially let me pivot off black.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like strong. I'm not like Riddle is the pick here, but I think given that we haven't seen much good in the colors that I'd like to be, I like trying to, as we've often been saying, I like trying to shoot the moon for the Descended deck at this point, and I think Riddle is good at that.
Yeah, that's cool. And then pick 4, you get a dead weight to solidify yourself in black a little bit,
A
and the
gift.
draft goes onwards from there. End up settling into the green-black deck that I am piloting right now. We'll see how it
I
does.
was just saying, I was like, record is 1-0. What happened? I need to know how this performs. The people need to know.
Well, tune in after this recording. I
That's
will
right.
be streaming for about an hour probably.
Well, and we'll have the link for this draft log if you want to see the rest of it, where you download the show so you can follow along and see Ben's updated record to see how it goes. The deadweight pick 4, just like, I was feeling so anxious, and like as soon as I saw the deadweight, my shoulders just dropped. Yeah, the big exhale. That is how it feels, though. Like you're just like, oh no, oh no. There's a card right next to deadweight dig site conservator that I also wanted to just shout out as like not as good because it's a 2-mana 2/1. This is the when it dies, you can pay 4 to discover 4, and you can sacrifice it to exile 4 things from their graveyard. It's just tough. Like this just trades down a lot of the time. It's not that it's bad, but it's not the premium. I thought like, oh, premium, colorless 2-drop. This is going to be a high pick in draft. I just don't think it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. That was a lot. I'm curious to see where this format goes. I am excited to explore more. I'm excited to get the old dubs flowing after my luck turns around here a little bit.
You're gonna get some dubs flowing. We got a lot of stuff to look forward to this week. We've got Thanksgiving on Thursday. We've got the Lords versus Resources showdown on Tuesday. We've got the Arena Open this weekend. I'm excited for all of that. I am not sure. I think I'm pretty happy that we've got Cons of Tarkir to look forward to. I'm pretty low on this set right now.
Well, that's my feeling as well, but I feel like that's just going to sound like me griping and complaining because I haven't been able to win. So I'm trying to be positive, optimistic, want to explore, I'm not willing to write the format off yet, mostly because I want to feel like I conquer it before
The rules of engagement just feel so restrictive to me at the moment. Like it feels like OG Ixalan to me, where it's just like, you gotta be aggressive. And if you're not, it's so hard.
But I also feel like I just wish I could play in high-level pods all the time, because I do feel like the self-correcting nature of draft would come about. Like I could see it being very interesting in high-level pods. That's why I am really jazzed about the showdown, and I'm really jazzed about the open. Lots of Magic to be thankful for.
For sure.
All right, great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thank you so much to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over there for any and all purchases, please use code LOL at checkout when you do to let them know we sent you over there, and more importantly, to get 5% off of anything you purchase. You can find all of our content at lordsoflimited.com. There's that tier list. We know you want to see those rankings. You can see just how far Grasping Shadows has fallen on that tier list. We've also got our merch, courtesy of TeePublic. We've got our Patreon page. We've got our episode backlog. We've got links to our YouTube and Twitch channels. All of that is available on our website.
If you got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.